to meet the public. Let us know when we're ready. We're there, are we? Oh, super fast. Thank you. So item 5, Chairman's announcements, absolutely none. Public speaking, James?
There's no public speaking, Chairman.
Right. Item 7, Cabinet reports. Excuse me. Page 6 in the appendix on page 12. And Jamie, you are ready to go at last.
I am, Chair. Thank you very much. So I'll just say a few words by way of introduction of this report. There have been numerous reports over the past 18 months around the organisation's response to and recovery from the COVID pandemic. This is the latest in a sequence that's listed as an addendum to the report. The intention of this report is twofold. When the decision was taken in June, the most recent decision and conversation around COVID recovery by Cabinet around our COVID recovery plan, there was a request for a bit more information. So at that point, we put forward budgets, indicative budgets for how we would spend money, both from the Containing Outbreak Management Fund, but also from our own unallocated ring-fenced grant from government, how we'd intend to apply that. But because they were indicative budgets, Cabinet quite understandably asked for a bit more clarity about cost and apportionment of cost, given a number of our services are, as you will know, shared across the one team and between the two councils. So within Appendix 1, item by item, we've therefore indicated what the cost apportionment logic would look like. Mostly, as you will see, it's the usual maths of 45-55, unless there's an exceptional reason for it to divert from that. So that's what we've set out in Appendix, along with an update on where we are with the cost profile of all those different items. But the second purpose of the paper is, and I hope helpfully so, just to give an update to councillors and to Cabinet on the progress we've made since June with implementing several of those items that we outlined in our COVID recovery plan back in June. And hopefully you'll see that some really good solid progress has been made on a number of fronts. So that's all, Chair, I wanted to say by way of introduction. I'm always happy to take as many questions as I can. I can't cover all of the council's work, but I can see snuck in at the back is Phil Courtier, who may be able to help me out with some of the areas where I'm a little bit more hazy. That woke him up there, Chair. That's all right. The questions are coming your way, Phil. That's all I said. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Grant?
Thank you, Chairman. Just before I ask my questions, can I ask that these reports, before they get put into the papers, are checked for spelling and grammar errors, because I did notice a number of those in the report. I'd see in the first bullet point there that the roles of the housing team already in place have had their contracts extended to 2023. I saw later on in the table there that talked about extended to 2022. So just wanted to clarify whether it was 22 or 23. That does lead to the question of these additional staff that are referred to in this paper. There's a lot of new apprentices and new roles and keeping staff on and all the rest of it. Are those going to be fully funded through this COVID support money? Because my concern, of course, is that we have got this target of savings that we're going to make through the collaboration process, and whether this is going to impact on that. And another question I have is if you can just give us a little bit more detail about the additional specialist capacity has been brought into the economic growth team to support post-COVID recovery for supporting local business bringing forward stalled sites. I presume that'll be something that Mr. Courtier will be able to talk about. So thank you. Those are my questions.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Councillor Nurden. In order that you asked them, and I will default to my esteemed colleague on the EC growth question because he'll know the detail better than I. 2023, and thank you for picking up on the unintentional error. My apologies for that. I think the point about funding and the risk of the funding ending is a really important one. It's covered in the risk section of the report, and it's something we as officers are very mindful of. This isn't about baseline funding. We haven't asked for additional baseline funding for these areas of response to the COVID recovery, but the issue is that we have a heightened degree of service on a number of fronts because we're dealing with a heightened amount of demand on a number of fronts. There is a risk that if that demand doesn't dissipate, we have a bit of a cliff edge effect, and that's something we're working through as officers in all of those service areas. So if I can give you an example that's close to me, in my service areas, housing, we have an additional 6 officers in the housing team at present, helping to deal with, and admirably so, the amount of homelessness issues that we're picking up, many of which are a consequence of social restrictions, domestic abuse, and other kind of unfortunate consequences. In parallel to dealing with the demand that's in front of us and the additional resource we've been afforded, we're also working on a project to look at workflow through the entire team because we're completely aware that we need to be able to manage that demand without that additional resources when the budget is expended. And you will have a similar scenario in each of the service areas where there's additional resource. So it's something we're mindful of and working through, but it is a risk, and it's right to bring that risk to councillors' attention. I'll ask Phil if he wouldn't mind commenting on the economic development team.
Yes, Phil.
Yeah, just confirm. There's a couple of people that have been brought in on fixed-term contracts. One is a gentleman called Brian Bush, who has 40 years of experience of working with businesses and networking, bringing and supporting businesses. And so we brought him in specifically to help businesses in a post-COVID environment, and he's engaging with them. And there's another person who's been brought in with a good experience in skills and training, was last at the Broadland training facility, again, to help us continue to shape and evolve and move forward the training agenda for people in this area as well. And that will include also reviewing how we use Carabrec going forward in this post-COVID and a changing training environment.
If I may, I understand the Assistant Director Economic Development is leaving us. Will he continue to be an employee or a contractor or something of that nature after his departure?
Fine. Yep, thank you. So he is leaving. He's leaving in a couple of weeks' time, but actually the new Assistant Director started yesterday, George Denton, and we've deliberately had an overlap period of a couple of weeks because there was a lot to learn of what is going on. There is an ongoing conversation which hasn't been finalised as to how we use Tig Armstrong, existing Assistant Director, how we can potentially use him in the forthcoming weeks. If we are able to continue to use him, it would be in a consultancy role with a number of very specific and stated projects that are time limited with clear outcomes associated with them, rather than just having a grey, let's carry on using him for a period of time. It would be very specific projects that are time limited with clear outcomes associated with them. But as I say, I repeat, that has not been finalised or agreed yet.
Okay. Phil, just clarifications on this point about the economic team. So there were vacancies within the team which are nothing to do with the additional funding that Grant's talking about. That was up to 7 at one point, I think, wasn't it?
Yep. So, I mean, I think I've tried to be as open and as candid about this as possible. The team has had an incredibly challenging time, not least because of the pressures of COVID. And I'll remind everyone, because I think it's a huge achievement, that team was pushing out £1 million of grants a week to businesses in Broadland and South Norfolk, as well as supporting, opening up the high streets, as well as supporting a significant growth programme. And at the same time was running with a number of vacancies. Actually, that team now has made a number of key appointments, including the growth delivery manager post, someone who's coming from ACOM called Emily Larter, Michael Horton, who's coming to manage the community assets team, Helen Scoyles that's come in for the housing team to replace those that remember Hazel Ellard. So number of key appointments made at that managerial level and a number of appointments made below. So that team is now very well staffed. There's a couple of people still to join. And I would say that within the space of a matter of literally 2 or 3 months, it's gone from a team that was really struggling to a team that's very enthusiastic about the future, very enthusiastic about the projects that they are running and leading and supporting businesses as we come out of this COVID period.
So there's still 2 vacancies left, did you say?
Oh, Chairman, now you're asking me. See, there's another apprentice starting, I think, from recollection next week. I don't think there are any current vacancies that have not yet been filled, but we may be waiting for a couple of people still to join us.
Okay. I'm picking this up from other councillors as well. We are losing track, a number of us, with the fast-moving pace of the one team. And I'm picking this up from parish councillors as well. From parish clerks as well. So we're kind of losing track of who, what and where. I know that I used to know in my sleep who was where, what they did, and you could just go, oh, right, okay. On what's happened with the economic team, is it possible to send us just a matrix of the names and their slots, which would be helpful to us?
Really happy. Look, again, very happy to circulate that. Very happy to give you a briefing at some time, whether that's 1 or 2 or whoever. Whatever's best for you in terms of understanding who's in that team now, what they're doing, what the principal roles are, and what the various projects are at this point in time.
Okay, and in relation to this report, the funding was additional to this, so it was helpful knowing if the team's in place, that really, if that team's not in place, this additional funding could be disjointed. So I understand that now. Thank you, Bill. Emma?
Yeah, just on a wider point in terms of structures, they are in your member area on your iPad. They're updated on a monthly basis for you. So you will have that as something you can look at regularly. And we have on the back of the last town and parish council forum, all parish clerks now have key contact numbers for all teams so that they know where to go via email or phone number. That was sent out to them about 3 weeks ago, I think.
By email. Okay.
That was what I was going to actually ask, if we could have an updated list, especially to the parish councils as well. Thanks.
If that's happened, well, it's needed. Thank you, Emma. Right, okie dokie. I'll get back to my parish clerk. So what you moaning about then? Right. Right. Anybody else? Right. Okay. There's one question I've got on page 12. Nope, not page 12. Sorry about this. Page 16. New ways of working, phase 2 accommodation. Develop and implement proposals for the use of our office accommodation, considering a hub and bespoke model, subject to business case and projected management. I see LB there. I'm guessing that's Lee Booth.
Yes.
Yeah, just make sure Phil's still with us. Presuming LB is Lee Booth.
Yeah, my understanding is yes, Lee Booth for the accommodation.
Okie dokie. And the 100,000 covers on the other column the consultancy fees.
Yeah, again, not not my. Debbie Lorimer is covering that more than I am. But again, yes, that's my understanding.
The consultancy fees are around about 100,000.
Yeah.
Is that right, Emma?
I'm looking at Emma as well on this.
No, that's the budget that's been put aside for the project. The consultancy fees were nowhere near that amount from memory. I would say a figure, but I will get it wrong. But it was nowhere near that amount. That's the whole budget for the project.
So the 100,000 for the budget, which reflects in that write-up, says subject to business case and project management. So subject to business case. So when is the business case likely to be written up on that, Emma, or Phil, or whoever?
So in terms of the accommodation, the business case, in terms of the current timetable,
This is the accommodation considering a hub and spoke model, page 16.
And if I may, it's the budget is there for the totality of what may be considered under that accommodation review. It's difficult to be specific about the cost because it's very dependent on the options presented to each council and the direction in which each council would like to go next. And would need to probably, I'm assuming Debbie would want to take stock, knowing the direction that each council sets on where it would like to head next and how to best absorb the cost that might ensue. So it's we know some costs can be allocated to that 100k, and it's 100k per authority, which, as Emma has said, or as Phil has said as well, it's Lee Booth as a project manager and the consulting costs we know of at the time. The next stage of the programme will be very dependent on the steer given by councils.
Yeah.
So in terms of your question on timeline, the joint member working group is meeting frequently. I know, Steve, you're part of that. That's meeting frequently with the consultation currently open, closing for all officers, members and town clerks at the end of September. That report will come through the committee timeline on the back of that once we receive the report from the consultants, and that will work its way through over the early autumn months into, I believe, joint member working group are signing off the timeline for that at your next meeting, I understand, and that will work its way through the decision-making process then.
Okay. Yeah, I was just checking on this as well because I did send an email yesterday about timing, which we raised at the last meeting of the working group. So thanks for that, Emma. Anyone else? No. Okie dokie. Are we happy to move to the recommendation, which is to note, really, isn't it?
To acknowledge the contents of the report, Chairman.
Yeah. Which is the appendix, isn't it? Yeah. So all agreed? Yes. Okie dokie. Thank you, Jamie. And are you staying here, Phil?
yes, with
We love
pleasure.
your company, Phil. Please stay.
I didn't have much else to do today, so I just thought I'd come along.
Oh, right.
No, Paul's presenting the next item, but I'll hang around for that as well.
Right. So, transport for Norwich strategy consultation, page 17, Ken, and page 22 on the Appendix A. Paul, how are you?
I'm well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. How are you?
Wonderful. Fire away, Paul.
Thank you. I don't like to start with an apology, but I think I'm going to have to in this instance. It appears somewhere in between the initial drafting of the report and its publication in the Cabinet Papers, the subheadings were lost from the report. You can see the paragraph numbering is still there. So my apologies. No doubt that's made it a little bit difficult to read. It certainly confused me when I first looked at it. So my apologies for that. Not that it will help this committee, but for your peace of mind, we will rectify that today ahead of the Cabinet meeting. Should make more sense for anybody looking at those papers from here on in. I'll give a sort of brief overview of what the consultation is and sort of key points. I'll try and keep it brief. However, of course, I'm happy to answer any questions. So by way of background, Broadland is currently being consulted on the draft Transport for Norwich strategy. The consultation runs from the 26th of August to the 8th of October. My understanding is members would have been notified when we received that consultation. So hopefully you'll have received that email as well as seeing these papers. In terms of what the Transport for Norwich strategy is, well, as you would expect, Norfolk County Council's Highway Authority maintains a suite of documents that set out its transport policies for Norfolk. This includes at the highest level, the local transport plan, which sets out transport policies across the whole of the Norfolk area, with the LTP the local transport plan being supported by a range of area-specific policies or detailed plans and policies. This includes the currently adopted Norwich Area Transport Strategy, which covers an area which is coterminous with the Norwich policy area as defined under the Joint Core Strategy, for those that are familiar with that. The LTP has been recently reviewed. It's gone through Norfolk County Council's cabinet and is due for adoption later in this year. So that brings the local transport plan up to date. And once adopted, the Transport for Norwich strategy will replace NATS itself. So it will be a sort of focused document. It doesn't cover quite the same geographical area as the old Norwich Area Transport Strategy. It doesn't actually define a specific boundary because the things it is considering will cover different geographies. But what it primarily focuses on is Norwich and the strategic growth areas that surround it, but also takes account of wider transport movements into the city and the urban area from the county and beyond, accepting that, of course, lots of people come into Norwich for a range of reasons. The strategy itself, which you'll have seen if you've had a chance to go through the background papers, takes the form of a high-level outcome-focused strategy rather than a detailed plan. That strategy will be accompanied by an action plan, which in its first iteration I'm expecting will set out committed schemes and areas of further investigation to define specific interventions. But that's not been produced at this stage and doesn't accompany this consultation. It will be published by the end of the year, alongside when the final strategy is due for publication. There's not going to be a specific consultation on that, as far as I'm aware, but I suspect as it's going to be initially an investigative piece of work in large areas, I can't speak for the County Council, obviously, but I would anticipate there'd be further consultation around interventions that may come out on this. It's probably worth noting that members can respond to this consultation individually should they wish. There's nothing to restrict them. It's a full public consultation as well as the council's formal response that's being considered through these papers. The key drivers behind the strategy, obviously it covers a range of transport issues as you'd expect, but if I was trying to compass that fairly quickly, it's about ensuring business and people can thrive through the transition to net zero emissions by 2050, in line with government policies, and addressing air quality issues. Those two matters are obviously fairly closely aligned, with air quality issues being a particular issue within the city area. And it's fair to say that achieving those outcomes are going to need significant interventions that affect how people move around. This will include transitions towards electric vehicles, but also looking at increased participation, or patronage rather, of public transport and levels of active travel. So I mean walking, cycling, and those types of ways of moving around. So there are going to need to be significant changes, I think, in that to address those issues. In terms of, and this will be the last thing I'll sort of say by way of context, the sort of key issues that we've tried to pick up in the draft response is stressing that the transport system does need to meet everyone's needs, and we need to recognise that Norwich plays a role for those residents that don't live within Norwich itself, and therefore we've stressed picking up the issues of rural and fringe accessibility for those that are going to need ongoing access to Norwich. And you may have noted in the response, we've encouraged issues such as rurality, health, low income and poverty to be picked up in the county's EQIA, which is something we do here, not covered necessarily as a protected characteristic under the Equalities Act, but something we pick up as good practice here, and we've encouraged that. Ensuring that the impact of sort of further general traffic restrictions are understood before they're brought in, making sure that we do have those high quality transport options to support major areas of growth and change. That gives the best opportunity to provide infrastructure that is habit forming for those residents moving to those areas. Maintaining access to the city centre for those with mobility issues. Not just that doesn't obviously cover just people who are disabled, as important as those are, but others that will will struggle to move around in quite the free way that others might be able to do. Ensuring that any interventions are phased effectively, so people have alternative transport choice as restrictions are as and when, or if and when, I suppose, they are brought in. And ensuring, and this picks up again, sort of the fact that Broadland is covered by two transport strategies, the LTP across the wider rural area, and so the local transport plan across the wider rural area, and the Transport for Norwich strategy across the sort of major areas of growth. Ensuring that actually those areas outside the Transport for Norwich strategy are not left behind, that adequate weight is given to the implementation plan that goes with the LTP, and also there's sort of dovetailing between the two types of interventions that will come through those individual plans where necessary. Examples might be the approach to an electric vehicle strategy. It might be how the policy around the local transport plan that seeks to improve access between rural and urban areas is implemented, and that sort of phased in. And I guess as a final point in terms of an overview, just ensuring that there is a genuine partnership approach to implementation, and there is very much a desire from county at the moment through this strategy to seek perhaps a more formal endorsement through the Greater Norwich structures, so the Greater Norwich Growth Board structures, than perhaps is the case with other transport strategies, which reflects that this focuses on that major area of growth and change, and also explains why we're taking this consultation response in perhaps a slightly more formal way than we might have in other instances. That was all I was going to say, Mr. Chairman. Obviously, I'm happy to take any questions or queries.
Thank you. Folks, questions, queries? Grant, you get into the nitty gritty of these things normally. So the Appendix A, which is the recommendation for the Cabinet response. I've been going through this and I'm trying to pick out what it is that Broadland are saying needs to be focused in on out of all of this text. And I've struggled a little bit with that, to be honest with you. There's a lot's been talked about here in relation to Norwich and the difference on rural locations. So, in summary, is there a summary to this? I mean, because some of the texts here are not actually kind of adding up to specific points of contention from Broadland, or what Broadland's sort of focusing on. I'm seeing, not seeing, whatever it is.
I mean, there isn't a summary of the response that's included here at this point in time. We've responded to the document by section, picking out key areas of concern, which we think, from our reading of the council's thoughts on these things, or members' thoughts on these things, are likely to be the major issues, and they're set out by section. I guess as a summary of what we're the thrust of what we're saying, I'd go back to the sort of key issues I tried to pick up in the presentation. So making sure that we continue to meet everybody's access needs as we go forward and interventions are put in place. That takes account of how people move into Norwich across the wider Broadland area and how they access Norwich, making sure that if traffic restrictions are put in place, that we understand the knock-on impacts of those, ensuring high quality transport, connections to major areas of growth, maintaining access for those with mobility areas, phasing interventions appropriately, and getting dovetailing between those two levels of strategies. I think those are the sort of key themes that are coming out from our response there, as I would summarise them.
Okie dokie. All right. Well, just one point. So on page 22, first paragraph, we have the housing service deprivation. We have a ranking of 165 compared with 287. Could you just describe what 165 v 287 actually means?
Okay, so this relates to the indices of multiple deprivations. Members may be aware that that's a national data set which is published, looks at a range of different areas of deprivation and ranks essentially the country in terms of how they perform against those measures, with one being the most deprived, and I don't know the number of local authorities off the top of my head, but 300 plus being the least deprived. What we've just tried to pick out there is that the strategy itself, when it contextualizes and paints a portrait of the area, looks at deprivation within the built-up area of Norwich and Norwich as a council area, but doesn't make reference to the fact that actually there are issues of deprivation that affect the wider rural area. And if you look just in pure relative terms, it appears that, well, Broadland's fine and Norwich has the issues. And actually, you need to drill in a little bit more detail. I've used, for the sake of sort of potentially extending this beyond where it needs to be, the measure that's used in the indices of multiple deprivation looks at access to 2 or 3 key facilities, so a supermarket, a post office, and there's a third. So it's really can only be used as a proxy for the sort of use of Norwich, but that's why we picked that out.
Yeah, appreciate that. And that clarification helps actually, because you're right, on this ranking, you'd think one thing, but we know within locations all over the place, there's some real issues going on out there. The other thing that, as officers, have you picked up from around Broadland this issue of a need for smaller buses to connect up rurally where they're more isolated from the main bus routes?
We haven't picked it up specifically in this response. We did feedback on the local transport plan strategy to say there needed to be a focus on how we improve the connectivity between rural and urban areas where the services are focused. And in fairness to the county, there is a specific policy within the local transport plan. I think it's policy 10 off the top of my head, which talks about a policy intention to improve that types of connectivity. There will be an implementation plan which goes alongside the local transport plan, and it's through that we'll see what's proposed in terms of interventions. The local transport plan isn't adopted at the moment, and the implementation plan will follow. So I think there's perhaps some detail to follow on there. What we've perhaps stressed through this is saying, well, actually, you need to look at where that end destination is, and if people are wanting to get on public transport to arrive in Norwich, then we need to think about that movement and how that's accommodated and how those two things dovetail together. And again, in fairness to the county, when they've re-looked at the geographical area for the Transport for Norwich strategy, rather than drawing a hard and fast boundary, they've said, well, no, actually, we need to think about movements in. So that they're alive to that issue, albeit that the proof of the pudding will be in, I guess, the eating, and that will be wherever the implementation plan is.
Yeah, and there's another reason this. When I'm putting my county hat on, I like to represent Broadland, if you see what I mean. Dave and Sue and Grant. Didn't think you wanted to say anything.
Thank you very much. I'm just curious because one of the projects I know has been worked on is the Transforming Cities Fund, and I'm just a little bit mindful that we've had projects that have come forward which has not really necessarily gone down too well with the residents that I represent in Helsden, and I'm just a little bit mindful of when we're looking at this project and we're looking at the Transforming Cities Fund. There's obviously independent projects, but they are sort of linked together when it comes to funding means. I'm just very mindful that if the investment is going to go into the city to the potential detriment of Broadland and its residents, I don't see really any assurances, and we can't get those assurances until we know what the forward project plan actually is going to look like. We're seeing this very, very piecemeal, and I think the plan is for it to be very piecemeal, looking at each individual part of the project, not necessarily as a whole. So looking through this, we've got they mentioned the levels of cycling. We've had issues about cycling, and not necessarily putting those infrastructure investments in the right place. And we're obviously working as a district and as the parishes that encompass it on some of the other projects of actually getting that to actually work. But I'm just really curious to actually know where the tangible benefits to our residents on this document that's actually in front of us is actually going to be, or whether we're actually just going to be in lockstep with the city. So the city gets the funding, the allocation, and the support, not necessarily making sure that we have substantial enough improvements on connectivity in the areas once you go past the fringes. Because I can tell you that the bus service in Helsden is pretty good. But when you go trying to look outside of that, it can be very, very difficult.
Yeah, and I think Dave's picking up on the same point, really. But there's been no feedback on that, has there?
Well, I'm aware that the county council continues to work with bus providers in partnership. There is a new government initiative, the name of which escapes me at this moment in time, but where they're negotiating, and my understanding is that should be in place towards the end of this year, which talks about how they will deliver services. There will be, I suspect, an ongoing challenge to services as it accesses into the rural area, no doubt exacerbated by the recent past and the decline in patronage on buses and the extent to which that can return. I mean, I think in terms of will this strategy be implemented to the detriment of Broadland residents? Well, I mean, I think in terms of what we've tried to stress in our response, it's about improving those high quality transport links to areas of growth and the fringe. It is true to say that I think that the way people move about is going to change. Some people may see that as detrimental, but I think it's a change that we're going to need to make government's commitments for all the reasons that we already understand around that. And I think as what we can do as a district is engage as effectively as we can with the county council, trying to seek the effective dovetailing of implementation plans where we can. And no doubt why we've sought to stress the integration of the implementation of this through those Greater Norwich structures is it provides us with a seat at the table on discussing these things and supporting them, and helps us to influence, albeit ultimately there will always be, I think, individual schemes which are deemed to be appropriate and important, which residents may find challenging or objectionable because of their nature. And I'd be a liar if I sat here and said I didn't expect that there would be more challenging schemes we'll need to consider in the future.
Okey-dokey. Sue, and then Grant. Sue Holland, right?
Yes, thank you. I may be misunderstanding. I couldn't quite work out under Chapter 1, geographical coverage of the strategy, paragraphs 1.11 to 1.18. The council is, however, concerned the final sentence of paragraph 1.18 appears to seek to limit the strategy to an area that does not effectively capture the full extent of the strategic growth area. Can you tell me where you think it's not capturing? Is that possible? I'm not clear about what area you're talking about.
Yes, I mean, I think we're just seeking clarity really there. So as 1.18 refers to the documents we're being consulted on, and through those paragraphs, the sense of the wording that was used seemed to focus more on the existing urban area than necessarily extending out across the whole of the strategic growth area, which my understanding is the intention of the strategy. And I think what we're just trying to pick out there is that the document is clear and consistent throughout, that it does cover those areas. And when I say Norwich and its growth area, for the sake of clarity, I mean as it's defined in the Greater Norwich Local Plan, which of course members will be familiar with, having came through the council's procedures, and that covers essentially the main planned areas of growth, including the Norwich-Cambridge Tech Corridor, which includes Norwich, North East Growth Triangle, the remainder of the Norwich Fringe, Heatherset and Wyndham, most of the key strategic employment areas, and indeed more or less all of the major areas of housing growth, with the exception of Long Stratton, which sits slightly outside of that. And I think we're just trying to make sure that that is embedded, so we get a coherent transport strategy that relate to those areas that will be most significantly changed through growth.
Okay, so thank you. I think that's one similar sort of thing, really, isn't it? We're talking about a wider area in Broadland that needs to be clear about. So thank you.
Yeah. Sue?
Thank you, Chair. I noticed that market towns are specifically mentioned. There's some things that perhaps might help if they were looked at. For example, how much is people's behaviour and the changes in behaviour being taken into account here? I'm thinking perhaps a park and ride in Aylsham, since it's being used as a park and ride anyway on the streets of Aylsham. So how extensive is how broad is the thinking? I think for younger people, with colleges and schools becoming more specialist, is it being taken into consideration that they need to be able to move across between the market towns to the high schools and colleges? So I'm just concerned that I'm not really seeing as much about people and changing behaviour in this, more the sort of logistics, which I'm not sure is where we should be focusing right now.
Yeah, thank you. There is a specific policy commitment within the strategy that talks about behaviour change and influencing behaviours. The council's been supportive of that in its response today, albeit it has stressed that that can really only be successful when the infrastructure there is to support the change that is desired. So the two need to go hand in hand. In terms of how issues in terms of movement from Aylsham into the city is being considered, this is what I believe the understanding is, or what I believe will be picked up when they talk about movements into the city from the county and beyond. There will be an investigation into actually, well, where are those key movements coming in and how can they best be accommodated? And that then leads to a discussion about, well, what the intervention might be to accommodate that. And I think that's something that's going to come through the action plan. So it's not beyond the scope of the thinking within this strategy as defined. And I think what the reason we've stressed as a council that we need to make sure that we're dovetailing those strategies is Aylsham would typically fall within the wider local transport plan area. I'm aware there is a network improvement strategy. I don't know what the local feeling about that is, that has been prepared. Okay. But clearly there needs to be an implementation plan around that, that brings that forward under the LTP, and that needs to dovetail in with whatever this strategy is coming out of Transport for Norwich. And in terms of movements into for education, that is a particular point we've picked out in our response, that people are reliant on those, often younger people without perhaps access to other means. And that brings us again back to the point of saying, when you do your assessments, please take into account rurality, issues of low income or poverty around actually how that's moved. So I think all that sits within the scope of this strategy and its consideration. Whether it will include interventions that will convince you are the right ones is probably something that can only come out through the implementation plan, and something that perhaps we'll need to take account of as we move down that route.
Yes, and there's still a huge fly in that ointment around deprivation in the rural areas in terms of transporting for 16-year-olds trying to get to college and haven't got the money to afford the bus, therefore they don't go to college. I know of people that have been in that situation. They literally do not take on further education to can't afford bus fares. I mean, this has got to be righted somewhere along the line, for sure. And then the connectivity from the small villages around, like a market town like Aylsham, by small transport networks as well. Thank you. Grant.
Thank you, Chairman. I might have missed it in the papers, but I am curious. Paul, maybe you can enlighten me. These responses to this consultation, were they a collation of responses you received from members, or is it officers that put this response together? And to what extent was the planning portfolio holder involved in putting this response together? I know it's an issue for Reedham being a very rural village, and the use of buses is significantly less in rural areas is an understatement. But that's an issue I believe that county has got to address rather than Broadland. But it is significant that at last night's parish council meeting in Reedham, one member commented that in order to get to a doctor's appointment in Acle by train, they would have to travel from Reedham all the way into Norwich and then catch another train that actually goes to Acle. So, it is the service or the transport service to rural areas is woefully poor, if I can put it like that. And that's the sort of thing that I would want to see in a response to this. But as I say, it's an issue that county more than Broadland can deal with.
Thank you. I mean, I think in terms of this response, this is a strategy which focuses on Norwich and the strategic growth areas around it and looks at movements into Norwich. So it will look at that. I think the issues of wider rural connectivity have been picked up in the local transport plan as policy, as I've said a number of times. The implementation plan is pending on that, and I don't know what will be in it, and it wouldn't be for me to speculate. I don't think. But I think that's where that wider issue of rural connectivity is picked up in a general sense. In terms of where this response has come from, so the planning portfolio holder sits on the Joint Transport for Norwich Committee. That was a committee that was brought together initially to consider the Transforming Cities programme. Its remit has now been broadened to consider also the strategy. As the lead officer, I've engaged with the portfolio holder through the development of this strategy, which has ultimately been endorsed by that joint committee, albeit I would say that the portfolio holder wasn't able to attend that committee, but was briefed in advance of what was contained in the strategy. The resolution of that committee being this was fit for consultation as a document. This response has been brought together by officers on the basis of what we've heard from discussions with members and individual officers across, the remit of our experience of negotiating with them. The portfolio holder was given sight of this response before it was formally published, had the opportunity to input, didn't seek any changes. And of course, members have further opportunities for scrutiny through the cabinet process themselves, and have the individual opportunity to respond should they wish.
Okie dokie. Didn't see your hand up, Tony, did I? No. Okay. Anyone else? And I will move to the appendix. Okay, so I guess I think it's worth picking up some notes in the minutes about some emphasis here that the Overview and Scrutiny Committee certainly picked up on connectivity going in, particularly in areas of deprivation, and then connectivity up. So that's from ONS's point of view. Perhaps the Cabinet could have a look at perhaps putting a bit more emphasis on that. If the committee agree, Would you agree with that? I think there's sort of been consensus around that point. Yeah, do we all agree? Yes. Show of hands. Martin. Okey-dokey. So we could add that as a kind of additional sort of recommendation in there, perhaps. Yeah. Is that okay, Paul?
Absolutely, Mr. Chairman, if that's what the committee wishes to see.
Yeah. I mean, do you see any issues with that yourself?
No, I mean, I don't. I mean, as I said, the strategy is explicit that it wants to take into account of movements into Norwich, and I think that's just emphasising points we've tried to pull out within the response to say, well, actually, the opportunities for some in the rural areas are going to be limited, and we need to think about that. If the point wants to be extended into the challenges of rural access to alternative means of transport, it may well be that the county defers that to anything coming out under the LTP. I can't see that it hurts, and probably only reinforces things we've said at a previous time to reiterate that now.
All right, thanks, Paul. So could you also reflect that back at the cabinet from here?
Absolutely, yes.
Thank you, Paul. Thanks very much. Okie dokie. So I think we are there on that one. And thanks very much, Paul. And are you hanging around still, Phil?
You got me for a little bit longer.
Oh, right. Well, we're nearly finished now. You know, you can't tear yourself away from us, Phil. You know that.
When it comes to flooding, I can assure you, Phil is an absolute expert.
Right, so item 10, Norfolk Strategic Flood Alliance, page 33, Ken, and page 36 on the Appendix A. And Simon, you're presenting, amplifying.
Yes, hi everyone. It's been a long while since I've been here, so good to see you all. If you can't remember me, I'm Simon Faraday Drake, one of the emergency planners for the two councils.
So it might be better if you pop up because everybody's sort of bending. They're all going like this now.
Oh, I felt like an aerobics class. I'll move around there.
Yeah. Well. Brilliant.
There we are. Good. It's probably better if you couldn't see me, actually, but here we are. Yeah, so this is it's more of an awareness thing, really, about the Norfolk Strategic Flood Alliance and the strategy that they've put together, which they're seeking ratification from all of the members of the group. Just a little bit of background, which is contained in that summary there. The alliance was set up following the flooding that we had over the Christmas period. And really what it seeks to do is, get a more cooperative approach to flooding and focus some strategic level attention on it to try and get things moving that perhaps have stalled a little bit in the past because there's so many different agencies involved in flooding. So that's really where they're just trying to get the ratification from everyone to say, are we on the same page and can we carry on with that work? And they'll probably seek an annual kind of sign up to that just to make sure that it's still on track. Not too many issues that we can see for ratifying that strategy. The only one that you'll see there that we've pulled up is that they are looking to consolidate or get a consensus approach on sandbags across the county. Each district does it a little bit differently. And what we've put there is that if they did decide that they wanted a different response in how we distribute or give out sandbags, there may be some resource implications for Broadland. At the moment, Broadland is in line with most of the other districts in that it doesn't give out sandbags routinely unless there's been a major incident officially declared, so something like an East Coast tidal surge or something like that. At all other times, it's a hard message, but the message that we give to people, which is in line with the Environment Agency and others, is that, it's up to yourself to put flood protection measures in on your own property, and we sort of direct them to places that can help with that. We do have a stock of sandbags that we keep at our depot for various reasons, some of them being flooding, some of them we've had calls in the past for unexploded bombs and things like that are unearthed when developments are being made, and the bomb disposal team will often ask for sandbags, so that's why we keep those. So that's really it. There's not too much to say about it. I don't know if there's any questions or any concerns about whether we should ratify that.
Okay. Grant.
Thank you, Chairman. And thank you, Simon. Strategy is a good thing to have. Action is always better because action speaks louder than words. Is this alliance the one that's chaired by Lord Dannett?
It is, yeah.
Okay, right. Because I understand that there was a report that they put out recently about the areas that they're going to concentrate on. And if that's the strategy, that they're just going to concentrate on specific areas, because I'm thinking in terms of a village of Strumshaw, which has had major flooding issues, and I was expecting to see in the report that that was going to be one of the areas that they would focus on, but there was no mention of it. And I understand that this strategic alliance is going to deal with, because it's county council involved, Anglian Waters involved in sorting out the issues in Strumshaw, but I don't see any action that's coming from this alliance. So it's all very well to have something on paper that's just words, but it's meaningless to the residents of a place like Strumshaw.
Yeah, if I can address that, there's a couple of things there. So they have come up with a first tranche of priority areas. I think Strumshaw, Norwich Road, Strumshaw is one of those first 16 areas, and there's another 16 to come where they're going to focus their attention. But secondly, I think it's important to sort of distinguish the fact that, you know, the alliance has been set up to sort of bring attention to the work for flood prevention and water management, but it doesn't replace the work that's already going on with, for instance, Norfolk County Council as the lead local flood authority, all of the other risk management authorities, IDBs, etc. So I think what the strategy is there to do is to reassure people that they're not trying to sort of take over this work. They're there to work in tandem, but to bring that strategic focus onto that multi-agency approach. But that's certainly something I think that we probably need to keep feeding back into that mechanism is, this is a priority at this area and this area and this area. So you're right, I think, but I'm pretty sure that Strumshaw is mentioned in that first tranche.
Anyone else? Sue? And then Tony.
Yeah, just one minor comment. In the earlier stages, you mentioned in your presentation about, nobody's quite sure who's in charge of ditches and so on. And I see in the strategy, it's talking about sharing plans with each other. I would just like to be sure that that includes people accepting responsibility for those things that and that where there are not clear, somebody takes responsibility for those, because I think that has been a major issue, particularly last December.
Yes, that is something that comes up time and again. I think, the riparian ownership of ditches and drainage, it's a thorny issue. It is sometimes difficult to enforce, but you're right as well that it's kind of fundamental to flood prevention, isn't it? Because you can have everyone maintaining their ditches at the end of their garden and then the person at the end doesn't do it, and that causes a huge problem. So I know that is a focus of the group, and they are trying to bring some attention onto that. I think going back to what Grant was saying about, words are one thing, but we want to see some action. And, I'm not trying to put words in the group's mouth, the Strategic Flood Alliance, but I think that is what they were set up to do. They really felt that they wanted to kind of bring some action to bear on these long-standing issues, and riparian ownership is right up there as one of those issues.
Anyone else? Tony, sorry.
With Lord Dannett chairing this meeting, I have every confidence that that things will get done. During my time as chairman, I met Lord Dannett on about 6 occasions and had quite a few chats with him, and he's very knowledgeable in a very quiet way. He's very forcible, and they always say if you want something done, get somebody acquainted with the armed services to get it done. And I'm quite sure that Lord Richard Dannett will do exactly that. The other thing is, and I'm going to take a leaf out of Grant's book now, is that 13, we are Broadland District Council, not Broadlands District Council. That's on page 53, Chairman. So I'm being a bit pedantic, but we are Broadland, not Broadlands.
Okay. Anyone else? I know it's on page 47. Sorry, 12, page 47. This figure of 150 million capital delivery program for 10 years. So that's the improvements, isn't it, to the delivery back to scan, scope, etc. Can I just ask you a question? During the flooding that did occur last December, I know that Buxton had the emergency sandbags come out. They needed them. So are you saying that we're still going to retain that stock at Broadland?
Yes, we have got, I think we've got about 500 or 600 bags at Veolia in Frettenham, 60 of which we gave to Buxton on a pallet there, the incident you were talking about. So there's a bit of discretion. We've got the policy that's on our website and that we've had for a long time, which is the one I mentioned earlier, but there's always a bit of discretion in there, I think. So, the main trigger is if a major emergency has been declared. That's nice and neat, but sometimes, we will still deliver things if we can. But it's where it's within our scope to do so. And I think what happened at Christmas, not so much in Broadland, but more in South Norfolk, it was far and above the scope of the council to be able to keep replenishing those stocks of sandbags out of hours, and that was very difficult for them to do there. Less so in Broadland. We did have issues over Christmas, Acle, Buxton, lots of other places as well, but not on the same scale as Long Stratton did.
Do they have a similar stock, 600, 500 sandbags?
Yeah, we've got those over at Veolia, 540 bags now, but they were fairly recently replenished. And we do, keep that. We've had that for a long, long time, as I mentioned, because we can sometimes get a call from the bomb disposal people saying they need 400 sandbags to put around an unexploded ordnance.
So the 500-600 are there for the use of Broadland. South Norfolk have another 4.
They've got their own arrangements, yeah.
Okay.
But I mean, we would mutually help each other out if needs be. But yeah, they do have their own arrangements.
I would have thought so, yes.
Yeah.
Okie dokie. They are needed at times. So, right. Okay. So if there's nothing else, we could wrap this up then. So again, it's noting this one, isn't it? Off to cabinet. So agree to note the report.
Agreed to recommend the cabinet to ratify.
Oh, sorry. Yes, ratify. Yes. Okay. I'll take it. There's no dissenters. Yeah, we agree to that. Right. Thanks very much. Well, Phil, it looks like you can say hasta la vista to us.
Thank you very much. Been a pleasure.
Nice to see you all.
Yes, take care.
Chairman, may I just make an